When you picture Blue Moon Beach, you imagine the kind of place that feels like it belongs in a painting water so blue it mirrors the sky, waves that move with a rhythm that calms your soul, and sand so white it almost glows in the sunlight. It's not just a stretch of coast. It's a living, breathing home to an incredible variety of birds, fish, and other creatures. The kind of place where, if you sit quietly long enough, nature starts to trust you a sea eagle might circle above, or a school of silver fish might flicker past in the shallows. For years, the beach had been more than a holiday spot. It was a sanctuary. The sea eagles in particular were a symbol of its wild beauty. They were magnificent, strong, and untouchable, or so it seemed. But the truth was, even a place that felt this pure wasn't beyond danger. The danger came quietly, without warning, hidden in the kind of human greed that doesn't care about the cost to the natural world. It started with fewer sea eagles in the sky than there used to be, fewer calls echoing over the water, fewer shadows sweeping across the sand. The reason wasn't a mystery. Their trees were disappearing, their space shrinking, and then came the smugglers. Smugglers don't just take birds, they take the heart out of a place like this. They strip it of its guardians, its symbols, its very spirit. These weren't people who wandered onto the beach by accident. They came with dark clothes, strange equipment, and a very clear purpose. You could almost feel it that the balance of the beach was about to be broken. The birds were at risk of being trapped, their eggs taken, their lives sold to the highest bidder somewhere far away. They would be caged instead of free, reduced to property instead of the wild kings of the sky they were meant to be. And with them gone, the magic of the place would fade. It's one thing to admire the beauty of Blue Moon Beach in photographs or postcards, but without its living inhabitants, it would be like staring at a shell with nothing inside. The smugglers worked in silence, blending in just enough to avoid attention. They watched the nests from a distance, learning the habits of the birds, waiting for the right moment to strike. They brought trucks with air, hold boxes, nets designed to catch wings mid-flight, and ropes meant to pull down even the most determined defenders. It's a cruel, calculated kind of work, knowing that by the time anyone notices, the damage could be permanent. What's most heartbreaking is how easily these rare birds could vanish. It wouldn't take an army to destroy what nature had built over decades. Just a few determined people, a plan, and the cover of night. One successful raid and the eagles would be gone, perhaps never to return. It wasn't just about losing a species in that area, it was about losing a piece of identity. The community loved those birds, but love alone can't stop people with no conscience. Protecting them required more than wishing for their safety. It required vigilance, courage, and the willingness to act in the face of danger. The thought that such rare and majestic creatures could be stuffed into a dark box and driven away was enough to turn the peace of the beach into a silent battlefield. It was in this fragile moment when the danger was real and the clock was ticking that two young hearts decided to do more than just watch. They didn't have uniforms or authority, but they had eyes wide open to the threat, and they refused to let the story of Blue Moon Beach end in silence. Because when beauty is under threat, doing nothing is not an option. It was late, the kind of night when most people were either asleep or winding down, letting the soft hush of the waves carry them toward rest. The moon hung low over Blue Moon Beach, silver light stretching across the water like a pathway no one dared to walk. The air was cool, the wind gentle, and everything seemed calm, but calm can be deceptive. Beneath that stillness, something was stirring. We hadn't gone out looking for trouble. In fact, the plan was nothing more than a short walk, maybe to watch the stars or listen to the sea before heading back. But the quiet was broken by a sound that didn't belong, the crunch of footsteps in the sand where no one should have been. At first, it was faint, like it could be the wind shifting the dunes, but then it grew sharper, more deliberate. There's a moment when your mind tries to tell you that it's nothing, that you should just ignore it, but then instinct kicks in. We stopped listening, and that's when the shapes appeared in the distance. Dark, moving shapes against the pale glow of the moon. They weren't wandering aimlessly. Every step they took had a purpose. You could see the glint of something metallic, the outline of a box, and the way they kept glancing over their shoulders. It was only then that the truth hit. They were here for the birds, those rare, proud sea eagles we'd seen gliding across the beach during the day, the ones whose calls seemed to belong to the place as much as the waves or the wind. They were going to take them. In that instant, fear and anger collided inside us. We were just two teenagers, no backup, no training, and no real plan. But we knew if we turned back, those birds would be gone before sunrise. There's a strange kind of clarity that comes in moments like that, the realization that doing something dangerous might be the only right choice you have left. We kept to the shadows, moving closer without making a sound. The smugglers didn't see us. They were too busy working, setting up their nets, whispering to each other in quick, sharp bursts. There was an open crate on the sand, lined with straw, clearly waiting for a living, breathing prisoner. My chest tightened just looking at it. Every step closer felt like stepping into a different version of ourselves, one where fear wasn't the thing holding us back, but the thing pushing us forward. My heart was pounding so hard it almost drowned out the sounds ahead, but we kept going. We didn't have weapons or strength on our side, but we did have something else, the element of surprise. We needed to act, but we couldn't just charge in blindly. One wrong move and the birds would be trapped before we could do anything. We crouched low behind a dune, watching every detail, looking for a moment where we could make a difference. That's when we saw it, one of the smugglers moving away from the others toward the truck. That brief gap was all we needed. We exchanged a glance, the kind of silent agreement that doesn't need words. Our breathing slowed, our steps became deliberate, and every muscle felt alive with purpose. We didn't know exactly how it would end. All we knew was that letting those men succeed wasn't an option. It's strange, the way courage shows up. You imagine it as loud, bold, and unstoppable, but in that moment it was quiet, focused, and sharp as a blade. We weren't fearless, we were terrified. But the fear had nowhere to go except forward. And in that silver, lit night, on that stretch of sand where danger and beauty collided, we decided that if no one else was going to stand between those birds and the people who wanted to take them, then we would. The truck was the heart of their operation. Everything they needed to steal from Blue Moon Beach, the nets, the crates, the ropes was packed inside it, and everything they planned to take away, the very life of the beach, would be loaded into it before the night was over. Watching from the shadows, we could see the dull gleam of its metal under the moonlight. Its engine was quiet for now, but you could almost feel the moment coming when it would roar to life, carrying the smugglers and their stolen cargo far from the coast. If that truck left, the birds would vanish with it. There would be no second chance, no trail easy enough to follow. This was the moment where stopping the truck meant stopping the crime entirely. But rushing toward it without a plan was asking to be caught, and once they caught us, it wouldn't just be the birds in danger. We stayed low, every move calculated, studying the smugglers' pattern. They worked in twos, one group near the nesting area, the other closer to the truck. That separation was their weakness. We just had to figure out how to use it. The idea came suddenly, the way ideas sometimes do when fear and urgency sharpen your mind. Don't attack the smugglers directly, trap the truck. If the truck couldn't move, neither could they. The beach itself became our ally. We knew the terrain, every dip in the sand, every clump of grass, every hidden angle where someone could disappear. About 20 meters from the truck, the ground narrowed into a soft patch of sand that sank under your feet if you stepped too hard. If we could block the truck's path right there, it would either get stuck or at least lose precious time. That was time we could use. We worked fast but silently. There was an old pile of driftwood near the rocks, tangled with ropes from some forgotten fishing net. We dragged them, piece by piece, into the narrow stretch of sand, laying them in such a way that they'd be hidden under the top layer. Then we looped the net's ropes into knots around the wood, letting the loose ends snake just enough to catch the undercarriage of the truck when it rolled forward. Every creak of the wood in our hands sounded like a gunshot in the quiet night, and every shift in the smugglers' movements made our hearts jolt. But luck was with us. They stayed focused on the nests, completely unaware of what was happening behind them. The plan wasn't just about blocking the truck. It was about making them believe the problem was mechanical. If they stopped to check it, if they argued about it, that delay could be the window for someone else to arrive or for us to act. Once everything was set, we slipped back into the shadows, close enough to watch but far enough to hide. My hands were trembling, not from the cold, but from the weight of what was about to happen. The smugglers began carrying their first crate toward the truck. The sight of it, the straw-lined box that likely held a living sea eagle, made the weight unbearable, but we had to hold on until the moment was right. Then it came. One of them jumped into the driver's seat, the engine coughed, and the truck began to roll. It moved smoothly at first, then hit the soft patch. The wheels spun, the ropes caught, and the entire vehicle jolted to a stop. Confused voices rose in the night. The driver tried again, harder this time, but the wood and ropes held firm. Another smuggler joined in, pushing from the back, but the more they struggled, the deeper the wheels sank. It was working. In the glow of the moon, I could see their frustration building. They had no idea that two teenagers, armed with nothing but scraps of rope, driftwood, and a fierce determination, had just stolen their escape from under them. In that moment, the beach wasn't silent anymore. It was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. When the truck was stuck and their frustration started spilling into the air, we knew we had only a small window to turn the tide completely. Stopping their escape was one thing, but as long as they were free to move, they could still fight, still harm the birds, still try to find another way out. We needed something that would hold them down, something they couldn't easily break out of. And the answer was lying right there in front of us, their own nets and ropes. It almost felt poetic, using the very tools they had brought to trap those rare sea eagles as the weapons to trap them instead. We'd seen them tossing the extra nets aside in the sand, coiled and ready to use once they reached more nests. Some were heavy, weighted at the edges so they'd drop fast over whatever they were thrown on. Those weights could work in our favor. If we could get close enough, the smugglers would be caught in their own game. The risk was enormous. We'd have to close the distance without them seeing us, and once we acted, there would be no going back. My mind kept telling me it was reckless, but my gut knew there wasn't another choice. The birds were still in their crates, and the smugglers were distracted by the stubborn truck. It was the perfect and only moment. We moved in low, circling from the dunes to keep out of sight. Every step sank softly into the sand, muffling our presence. The nets were piled near a crate by the tailgate, and we crept toward them like shadows. My fingers curled around the coarse rope, the rough fibers digging into my skin. It was heavier than I'd expected, but there was no time to think about that. From where we stood, we could see 3 of them too near the truck, one pacing nearby, muttering curses under his breath. The pacing one was closest, and we had to take him first. With the moon behind us, we threw the net in one clean motion, letting the weighted edges carry it wide before it dropped over him. He shouted in surprise, clawing at the ropes, but the more he fought, the more the weights tightened around him. The noise drew the other two's attention, and they ran toward him exactly what we needed. Before they could react, we yanked a second net from the pile and flung it low, catching their legs. They stumbled hard, landing in the sand with a thud. The ropes twisted as they rolled, tangling them further until they could barely push themselves up. Adrenaline surged through every part of me. We didn't stop to think, just moved. The smugglers tried to cut themselves free, but they dropped their knives in the fall. I grabbed one of the loose coils of rope and pulled it tight around the nearest man's arms, looping it again and again until the knot held. Another rope went around the second man's ankles. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to keep them down. The one in the first net was still thrashing, trying to kick free, but we pulled the remaining rope and tied the net to the wheel of the stuck truck. Now, even if he managed to loosen the net, he wouldn't get far. For a few long seconds, the only sound was their labored breathing and the waves crashing in the distance. We stepped back, hearts pounding, barely believing what we'd done. These men who had come here under the cover of darkness to steal something precious were now lying in the sand, bound and tangled in their own tools. And as the moon lit the scene, the truck stuck in the sand, the crates still unopened, the smugglers helpless and furious, it felt like the beach itself had turned against them. With the smugglers tangled and their truck firmly trapped, we knew the hardest part wasn't over, not yet. We had stopped them, but we couldn't keep them pinned there forever. The beach was vast, the night was deep, and if any of them managed to break free before help arrived, everything we'd done could unravel in an instant. That's when the sound we'd been desperate to hear finally broke through the night, the distant hum of a vehicle coming down the dirt road toward the coast. For a moment, I thought it might be more smugglers, but then the faint flash of blue and red lights cut through the dark. Relief hit like a wave, almost knocking the strength from my legs. We waved our arms high, signaling toward the approaching headlights, hoping they'd see us before the dunes blocked their view. The police truck rolled to a stop just short of the soft sand, and 3 officers jumped out. Even before they reached us, their eyes were on the crates stacked at the back of the smuggler's truck. You could see the urgency in their faces. They knew exactly what they were looking at. One officer went straight to the bound men, checking the knots, while another began inspecting the nets to make sure none of the birds had been harmed. When the first crate was opened, the air seemed to change. Inside, a rare white, bellied sea eagle sat still, its piercing eyes wide but uninjured. The sight of its feathers glinting under the moon, head turning sharply as if it, too, sensed the danger had passed, made every risk we'd taken feel worth it. One by one, the officers lifted out the crates, handling each with care. Some held adult birds, others carried nests with fragile eggs cushioned in straw. Each egg was precious, the kind that could bring a new generation of these eagles back to Blue Moon Beach if given the chance. One officer knelt, gently checking the eggs for cracks before placing them in a padded container they'd brought. Another carefully covered the freed eagles with lightweight cloths to calm them before transport. The smugglers were furious, spitting out threats and excuses, but the officers barely glanced at them. They had them exactly where they needed, wrists bound, feet tied, and a truckload of evidence right beside them. One officer radioed in, reporting the capture and requesting a wildlife rescue team to meet them back in town. As the birds were carried toward the police truck, a strange calm settled over the beach. The chaos of the night, the chase, the struggle, the nets was fading into the background, replaced by the sound of soft wing beats and the quiet words of the officers as they worked. It struck me that these eagles would never know how close they'd come to disappearing from this coastline forever. They wouldn't know about the midnight struggle or the ropes and nets being turned against the very men who'd brought them. all they would know, once they healed and returned to the wild. Was the sky over Blue Moon Beach the same sky that had always been theirs? When the last crate was loaded and the smugglers were escorted toward the police vehicle, the lead officer turned back for a moment. "You did the right thing," he said simply before climbing in and starting the engine. The lights swept across the sand one last time before disappearing into the night, carrying both the rescued eagles and the men who had tried to steal them away. And just like that, the beach was ours again, quiet, moonlit, and safe, at least for now. It had started as nothing more than a summer evening plan, the kind of thing you do when the days are long, the air is warm, and the thought of going home early feels like a waste. The beach had always been our place, a strip of golden sand and silver water that seemed endless, where the world felt far away and every moment belonged entirely to us. We weren't looking for trouble that night, and we certainly weren't expecting anything that would pull us into the kind of story people tell for years. But that's the strange thing about life. Sometimes it takes an ordinary night and flips it into something unforgettable. We'd gone to watch the moon rise over the horizon, the way it always seemed to spill light across the waves like molten silver. The tide was low, and the air smelled of salt and seaweed, with the occasional rustle of palm leaves in the breeze. We were talking about nothing important, just the kind of easy conversation that drifts and changes without effort, when we noticed something odd down by the dunes. At first, it looked like shadows moving, nothing unusual, since the wind could play tricks in the moonlight. But then we saw the faint glint of metal, the sharp movements of people who clearly weren't strolling along the beach for the view. That's when everything shifted. A quiet summer evening became the opening act of a night we couldn't have imagined. We followed, not really thinking about what we'd do if we caught up. Curiosity pulled us forward, but somewhere inside there was also a sense that this wasn't just a harmless mystery. The sound of low voices carried over the sand, mixed with the scrape of something heavy being dragged. That's when we saw the crates. Even from a distance, we could tell they were designed to hold something alive. It's a strange moment when you realize the choice you have to make: walk away and pretend you saw nothing, or step closer and get pulled into whatever comes next. We looked at each other, and in that glance the decision was made. We didn't speak it out loud, but we both knew there was no way we could turn our backs. Every step from then on was different. The sand felt colder under our feet, the air heavier with the weight of what we were walking into. There's a kind of courage that doesn't feel like courage at all. When it's happening, it just feels like doing the only thing you can live with later. We weren't thinking about danger or the size of the men we'd seen. We were thinking about what was in those crates and what it meant if we did nothing. The plan that formed between us wasn't perfect, in fact. It was nothing more than a series of quick, whispered ideas, strung together with the hope that we could stall these people long enough for help to come. We had no real tools, no training, no safety net. What we had was trust. Trust that we'd watch each other's backs. Trust that we'd make the right split. Second calls when it mattered most, and trust that somehow we'd both walk away from this night in one piece. Looking back, I think that trust was what made it possible. We didn't question each other, didn't waste time arguing about the risks. In a way, it stopped being two people on a beach and became one shared determination to protect what couldn't protect itself. When things got messy, when we were ducking behind dunes, dodging flashlights, and figuring out how to turn the smugglers' own gear against them, it was that unspoken connection that kept us moving. We didn't need to signal or explain. We already knew what the other was about to do. And when the moment came to face those men, to step out of the shadows and make our stand, we did it together. By the time the police arrived, the fear had worn off, replaced by something warmer, not relief exactly, but the quiet pride that comes from knowing you've done something that mattered, the kind of pride that feels heavier than a trophy and lasts longer than applause. It's strange to think that a night which started as nothing more than a summer adventure could turn into something so much bigger, a story about rare eagles, dangerous smugglers, and a beach that will always hold the memory of what happened. But more than anything, it became a story about standing side by side when it mattered most. And so, from a quiet summer night to a battle against smugglers, we found courage we didn't know we had, a plan we never thought we'd make, and a friendship forged in the heat of danger. The sea eagles now soar free, their eggs safe, and Blue Moon Beach still breathes with the life we fought to protect. This wasn't just an adventure, it was proof that even ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they refuse to look away.